racism is impacting us all over the African diaspora. So I'd first like to ask the panelists to share your name and your organization, and then we'll start with the first question of why do you think it is important to explicitly include race and racism in the UNFCCC?
Hi, my name is Susan Otieno from ActionAid, and a close collaborator and a partner with the PACJA. Just to go straight to the question. When you talk climate and you talk of the impact of climate change, you'll definitely see it on people with color. And you directly see it with Africans, unfortunately, when you talk of the impact. And that's where the importance of talking about racism as we talk about climate starts its journey. When you talk about the people who are impacted, you narrow down to the women, you'll find the African women. Hence, it's important in a nutshell.
Thank you. Yes, let's give her a round of applause. Thank you so much.
I will speak in French. My name is Didier Molichot, membre du Parlement panafricain, président de la Commission économie rurale, agriculture, ressources naturelles et environnement. Le Parlement panafricain voulait inscrire dans l'action de cette COP la justice climatique. Nous sommes partenaires des PACJA depuis beaucoup d'années et nous pensons que le moment de l'action est arrivé. Et nous pensons que le moment de l'action parlementaire est arrivé parce que c'est les parlementaires qui représentent le peuple et c'est le peuple qui souffre. Le peuple africain souffre du changement climatique alors qu'il pollue moins. C'est tout l'intérêt de notre participation ici.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I don't know whether you have gathered what he was saying. Perhaps do we have one who can translate for the purposes of audience? One of our colleagues, Agustin?
He's Honorable Mauricio from the Pan-African Parliament. The Pan-African Parliament has been collaborating with PACJA for a long time, and since they are the representatives of the people that are the front line of climate impact, he thinks this initiative is quite welcome, and they want to inscribe or register their support for this initiative. That's all he has said.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So let me greet you with the greetings of solidarity on the climate justice movement. What do you want? What do you want it?
Wow.
When you want? Thank you very much. Let me start by celebrating my icon, Robert Bulland. When we started this notion on climate justice, we were digging into books and the books and the books. And the only initial definition on climate justice, I only found it from one US individual, one person of color, and here he is. I'm very privileged to meet him here today. Let us appreciate this gentleman, ladies and gentlemen. I also celebrate my colleague, and we have been in the trenches for a long time, Jacqui Patterson, and the entire team of her foundation and the NAACP, Kate, and those others who have worked in all this movement for a long time. We are very delighted today to be part of this collaborative. If you talk about racism, if you talk about discrimination, if you talk about exclusion, it is, we have the manifestation of that exclusion, and racism is one of the cancers we want to clear out of these negotiations. I have been part of it. I have attended the past 10 COPs. And if I can tell you, racism manifests itself in these COPs, and we need to talk about it. We need to be louder about it. We have seen all sectors and thematic areas being carried out and having saying that we do not have voice, but what about Afro descendants, people of African descent? And so as we mark this journey, with the first time having a pavilion, having a space where the African people, where the people of color can say, come and they say, yes, this is where I belong. This is kudos, the team which came up with this. And as the African people, we are going to be in solidarity. But this is not just talking about it. It is the issue of power relations. Do we have power? Yesterday, we were setting the agenda for the UN to proceed the next 2 weeks. Africa was brought here united by one thing: special needs and circumstances for the African people. That is what carries our hope, our aspirations, our demands. It was dropped at the agenda stage because we do not have power. I was asking myself whether, if it is EU which was carrying that agenda, it could have been dropped. If it was the United States with its power which was carrying that agenda, couldn't be dropped. And those other, it is the issue of power, and that is manifested through racism, which we are going to fight here from now henceforth. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Now. Climate justice. Now.
Thank you. And let me say, people, we have the power, and we must use the power within us to force these discussions, because most times people don't want to discuss racism, and they don't want to discuss climate colonialism. But we have to be the voice. We have to bring this up. And we do have environmental injustice. We do have climate colonialism built within the framework of the UNFCCC process, and we must be prepared. We must have the courage to call it out when we see it. It's very important that we do this. It's not about just policy making, but we have to center people in policies. And for far too long, we have had negotiations that did not center people, or they would say things, they would talk about a just transition, but when it came down to actually implementing those talks, we did not see them being implemented in the policy process. And so we have to be vigilant. We have to demand that people are centered in these policies within the UNFCCC process.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And so our next question is, when we know all these systems have been put against us and have caused so much travesty in all of our collective communities, what do you think about climate reparations and loss and damage?
I'll come next. Thank you. I wanted to pass it over to Dr. Mithika.
What do you think about climate reparations in the context of loss and damage?
Thank you. Reparations. The whole question of climate change is that someone somewhere has caused the crisis we are in. And just think about a child you have broken an egg for this child. You have to replace it. And so, reparations, and this is what the North does not want to hear. They don't want to listen to that because it translates in trillions. It is like actually slavery. It is like slavery, economic slavery, that now you have caused the problem. You have pumped the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. You have killed our future, the future of our children, future generations. And now we demand that you have a responsibility really to compensate. Reparation is about compensation. You compensate. But that, when it is now, we were fighting for it about on climate deaths initially. Then they went through the corners. Then it is back through the loss and damage. Loss and damage is that you are the cause. Right now, where I come from, in the Horn of Africa, that 8 million people are facing starvation. Some of them are dying. Millions and millions of livestock are already dying. Wild animals. There is no tourism again. There are no animals to see. Wildlife. And so the point here is that we see loss and damage as very critical because it is going to cover and compensate. But they don't want to listen to that. And so, you know now they have been cutting corners. Yesterday, the UK said they are not going to pay to support loss and damage because they are fearing us to ask them to pay trillions and trillions of dollars, which are supposed to be delivered through this reparation. And so, it is upon us. Let us generate that critical mass. Africa itself constitutes of more than almost 1 billion people. We have also the diaspora, the people of color. I think the only answer we have and the only voice we have is to strengthen our voices. And once we have that critical mass, you know what the numbers can do. So we are not going to slow down. We are not going to give up. I think what we have experienced here is a short setback. This is temporary. We are going to win, and we are going to win ultimately. What I will finish by is saying that when those who have caused the problem think that they are helping Africa, this is not charity. The problem of climate crisis is going to affect everybody. I normally give that example of that titanium, which you start thinking, the strong ones who are able to jump very, very quickly at the top of the titanium, but eventually all of it sank. It is very few people who survived. And so we want to caution that this is titanium, which is going to sink everybody. It is just a matter of time. Look at what is happening in Europe. Drought which has never been seen. Rivers drying up. So they were thinking, and China and those are elsewhere, they were thinking that this is the problem of Africa. Now it is at the doorstep. Let us work. We need really to address climate change on equality, on the basis of justice, because those are imperatives of climate justice. Those who have caused the problem should address it. Thank you.
Ashe. Ashe.
Thank you. Loss and damage or reparations is actually, it's being made more complicated. It's a very simple complex that you break, you fix. And a lot of times countries have done everything. As a matter of fact, they didn't allow loss and damage, wasn't even on the agenda at the SB in Germany. So we were able to get it on the agenda at COP27, but we have to hold the countries who have contributed most to the disruption of our climate, we have to hold them accountable, because those who have contributed least are the ones who are being most impacted. And all we're asking is to make right on your promises, make right, take up your responsibility. And a lot of people are afraid. They don't want to hear restitution or reparations. And when we talk about finance, we know promises have been made, but those promises have not been kept. Developing nations, countries who are being impacted most, countries who are being impacted by flooding. But it isn't just the global south, it is also the Gulf South, which are being adversely impacted. And it's very important that we look at this picture holistically, and we have to make whole. We have to take responsibility for the loss and damage we've caused, that the developed countries have caused to the struggling communities.
Ashe.
In French. Pour nous, la survenue de Covid-19 devait nous servir d'exemple. Parce que le changement climatique affecte plus les pays africains maintenant, mais... Oh, we can... You want... Translate. Yeah. Okay. Les paiements des dommages causés par le changement climatique.
It's not working.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay, it says COVID-19 should have served us a great lesson.
Oui, le Covid-19 doit nous servir des leçons parce que le changement climatique affecte le monde entier. Et les pays africains sont le plus affectés. Mais nous savons que ce ne sont pas les pays africains qui sont responsables en grande partie de ces changements climatiques. Ils contribuent très faiblement au changement climatique. Mais les autres nations qui polluent plus devraient payer plus parce que, comme le Covid, on a vu ce que le Covid a fait. Le Covid n'a ménagé personne. Le Covid a affecté tout le monde. Et l'impact du changement climatique sera plus dramatique partout au monde.
Just as COVID-19 that we say should have saved us a lesson, climate change, yeah, but hello? Yeah, Honorable was saying COVID-19 should have served us a great lesson because it impacted everyone, whether the global north or the global south. It is true that Africa was heavily impacted. Climate change is impacting everywhere, but Africa is suffering the consequence of climate change, and they have not caused the problem. So the issue of reparations is just but fair that we should talk about it and take that into consideration.
Et au niveau du Parlement panafricain, notre conviction, c'est que c'est maintenant ou jamais que l'action parlementaire doit se faire. Et l'action parlementaire doit se faire en deux directions. Il y a l'engagement des parlementaires à domestiquer dans leur pays respectif toutes les lois nécessaires, contrôler l'action de l'exécutif, mais il y a aussi le volet de la diplomatie parlementaire.
So at the Pan-African Parliament, we are convinced. Okay. I'm being told to stand here. So at the Pan-African Parliament, we are very convinced that climate action is now or never. And that climate action by parliamentarians is in two directions. The one direction is control of government action on the ground. And again, the second part is that we have to domesticate the laws to facilitate climate action on the ground.
Mais le deuxième volet, c'est la diplomatie parlementaire. Et cette diplomatie parlementaire s'est faite avec les autres parlementaires des pays du Nord.
The second part, therefore, is the parliamentary diplomacy parliamentary diplomacy takes place between relationship between African parliamentarians and parliamentarians in the global north.
C'est de convaincre le parlementaire des autres pays à influencer leurs exécutifs à financer les interventions pour réparer les dommages. Merci.
And exactly, it means that the Southern parliamentarians or African parliamentarians have to convince their northern peers to put pressure on the northern executive to finance climate action in the global south. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If I can contribute, we need to look at it from the cause, and what is so saddening is that the climate injustices are more of a behavioral result. It's what you do and what it causes. What you do, the result that it causes. And therefore, you're able to direct it to the person who did the damage. And we do not see the North running away from this blame. That cannot happen. And that's why it brings it back to us as people in the South to really redirect the loss and damage conversation to where it ought to start from. You messed it up, as my counterpart has said, you pay up. And if you're paying up, is it that you're choosing what to pay up for? I don't think you have a choice. You have to compensate the damage that you've caused. And if there's need to know the damage that has been caused by climate justice, just look at the weather patterns, the disaster that we are seeing. If it's not drought, tomorrow it's floods. That's enough to tell you the impact of climate injustices. And when you go deeper, then you get to see it in Africa. You go deeper, you get to see it on the black women in Africa, because they are the ones who remain with nature to tend, but also rely on nature for their survival. So as you continue damaging the climate, you will definitely see the effects on Africans. So we cannot run away from it. If the North is saying they are not ready to compensate, then we need to continue speaking about it and pulling in everyone who believes that it's now being looked at a Southern effect and let the South deal with it. That is something we shouldn't accept. We have to pull together. If you move to the alternatives that are now available, the mitigations that are available, they are not alternatives that are easily affordable for Africa, for instance, because we are burdened by debts. We are burdened, the COVID effect, much as we didn't lose as many people in Africa as it was expected, but its effects are still being felt and felt till today in Africa. So we have to come together. We have to talk about loss and damage. We have to talk about it to the right people. And I believe this is the right space. If it is not being focused on effectively on the agenda, we are here to make sure that it's focused on. Thank you.
It is our duty to fight for freedom. It is our duty to win. I'm asking all of the black femme to stand up in regards to today is Green Day for women and the sacrifices that women make that loss and damage will never replace. The violence, the raping, the violence, the raping, the sacrifices women make to get access to water. Ashe, it is our duty to fight for freedom. It is our duty to win. I want to point out that we have a resolution that is being passed around that's called the Racism and Climate Reparations, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We have it in English, we have it in Swahili, we have it in French, we have it in Portuguese, we have it in Spanish. And we're asking you to sign off onto this resolution. We may have run out of some, so we want to be able to email you electronic copy. You can contact J Pat1, email.
It's J Patters 1, JPATTERS 1 at gmail.com, because you don't want to have my whole long email address. So that's a short one, JPATTERS 1 at gmail.com. Otherwise, we don't have any French or English left. So we have Swahili, Spanish, and Portuguese left.
You can also come up to me and sign off, put your organization and your name so that we can add you to this resolution. So just wanted to put that announcement there. And now we'll go back to our panel discussion, where we would like to have two persons come up to make some commentary. One is Miss Memory Feminette and Reverend Lesmore Ezekiel. Just a memento comment. Thank you. Yes, let's give them.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank you so much for bringing this topic to the agenda. And I want to just reiterate that as African women from the continent, our issues are historical, together with the African and Afro-descendant women who all this economy that we are fighting that has caused the disaster that we face today. It's an economy that was built on the backs of African women on the continent, on African women or women of African descendants who were taken by slavery 4 years ago, 4+ years ago, who have built these economies that have caused these disasters, the economies that we are being forced to pay for in these conferences where our voices are not being heard. So it is time for us to stand together to really prioritize and to center and to make sure it's explicit, even as our leaders are talking, for us to ensure that the reparations are on the agenda. The reparations are coming to us on the continent, but also recognizing the women who are of Afro descendants in the Caribbean, in the Americas, in the Asia, and in the Europe. So we stand for that and we demand for that. It should not be in 2024. It should be now. It should be now that this agenda, we are talking 400+ years of slavery that has never been talked about. We are talking about our land, our forest, which as African women, we still have to struggle within the patriarchal capitalist system. So now is the time for us to stand together. Now is the time to also have our brothers supporting us, our climate justice. There is no climate justice without gender justice. There's no climate justice without racial justice. Thank you.
Climate justice. What do we want? What do we want? When do we want it? When do we want it? The issues of climate justice and tying it also to the question of racial discrimination and racial injustice are matters of life and death. And it must be seen as such. It cannot be politicized. It cannot also be commercialized. Because oftentimes we have seen a situation where issues relating to racial justice or climate justice, it is often been politicized or romanticized. And when we talk about climate justice, we are looking at the issues of life and death, because it affects all of us. And as religious people, we talk about we are all created in the image and likeness of God. But oftentimes we have seen that it remains as a rhetoric, not being translated into our concrete realities and actions. And so the issues that are being raised here for us to look at racial justice in relation to climate reparation is very critical. So it brings in the question of legacies of slavery, legacies of colonialism, that those who are responsible for that must be called to account. And those who are hypocrites must be named as hypocrites. Because oftentimes people come to the table, they pretend that this is it. But therefore, we must call the hypocrites to account. And that this reparation is not a joke. And all of us must be collective in our call. And that is why I hold dearly to the call that Dr. Mithika made. We need to form a critical mass that we will amplify our voices of justice. Do not be co-opted. Do not be co-opted. Do not be co-opted. Don't fall into the conspiracy of silence. Speak now for justice and justice for all. Thank you.
Ashe. Now we're going to turn it to Mithika. We're going to ask you a question specifically, Mithika. You've been going to the COP for the Conference of Parties for a while, and you know the ins and the outs of the process. What would be the strategy to get race, racism, and climate reparations into the UNFCCC negotiations? What are the key steps?
So for me, I just borrow from the strategies we used to integrate and to ensure climate justice is embedded in what we are doing now. I was quite excited, though those are baby steps, that in the preamble of the Paris Agreement, you find just a term, climate justice. When we started this discourse on climate justice and democratized this UNFCCC process, which used to be really very rigid science and environmental discourse, then no one was even bothering. In fact, some of them were regarding us as mad fellows, raising issues which are not supposed to be done at scientific discourses. But look at what is happening. Whatever we are doing here actually is out of that struggle. So that gives me strength that right now, as we now start building a foundation and saying racial justice is something which we have been silent about in the UNFCCC. Why are we talking about the rights of indigenous people? Why are we talking about the trade unions? Why did the trade unions have very good victory when we started and then just transition? Because it came from the American trade union movement, because they shouted about it. Women, gender, and those others. So even this, what we are starting today, let me assure you that it is going to be centrally embedded into the UNFCCC. If you don't speak, no one will speak for us. We need racial justice, the racism to be discussed here, because it is all what we experience. We are actually victims of it, even within actually the civil society, ourselves, within the African civil society. We have actually experienced it with and I talked about power relations. We don't want to go that because those are our allies, but I think really it is permeating not only into negotiations, even within our movement and civil society. We have to speak about it. Representation and our voice is about us. If you don't speak, you are not given a voice. That is the issue of procedural justice. And it is very important for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nothing about us without us. Nothing about us without us. This next question is for everyone. How are you going to connect what's happening here to the communities to whom you are accountable to at home?
Let me first say, is this working? Let me first say that within the UNFCCC process, we have flawed carbon accounting rules under Article 6 that will adversely impact or cause even more harms to the global south at the, where the global north is actually financing energy transitions that are even more harmful than fossil fuels. But because of these flawed accounting rules, the emissions aren't being properly accounted. And I think that's a travesty because we have allowed a system that will say on paper you're not counting these emissions properly. And so you can use your fancy tricks, your trickery math on paper, but you will never fool the atmosphere because they are disrupting the atmosphere and they're even more harmful than fossil fuels. And I think that we need a just, when we talk about a just energy transition, it must be one that is carbon free. We must not transition to an energy source that is even more harmful than what we have now. And I see this happening. I see the environmental impacts in my community in the southeast U.S. that's being sacrificed for new energy economies in other countries. And they're being sacrificed with the environmental impacts of biomass manufacturing, and they're being shipped to countries who are being credited for reducing their emission when they are not actually reducing their emissions, they're just not counting the emissions.
Ashe. Yes, thank you. And thank you for what you're doing in your communities.
Thank you. I think one most important thing to do is to let the communities that we are representing here know that there was an opportunity to think about the effects and what they are going through at the moment, but the opportunity was taken away by not considering what ought to have been on the agenda. My concern is how I'm going to translate and let a woman whose daughter will not be in school next year because there was drought in East Africa, but because she could not feed the daughter, she opted to have the daughter get married, and for her to get married, then she has to go through harmful traditional practices, for those who know about female genital mutilation, as a rite of passage. Because she could not feed the daughter, she had to give away the daughter to a harmful practice so that she can be married, one, as a way of loading a mouth to feed, and two, as a way of ensuring that the family restores its dignity by receiving dowry. That's the community that I'm sitting here and representing. And for me, I'll let them know that the struggle continues. Their voice is important. It may be a voice at the community, but when we augment that voice beyond Kenya, beyond East Africa, beyond Africa, then we have other women of Afro descendants and those who are supporting us, the young people who are fighting this battle, that climate injustice is affecting that kind of woman back at home. That's the most important thing for me. And unless it's put on the table, unless it's well discussed, unless the people like me, like her, are on the table to participate, then I'm worried about the solutions. And that's what I'll take home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Comme parlementaire, notre rôle doit être déterminant maintenant. Au niveau du...
As parliamentarians, as parliamentarians, we need to play a very key role now.
Le slogan du Parlement panafricain, c'est Une Afrique, une voix.
The,
One Africa, one voice.
the Pan-African Parliament slogan is One Africa, one voice.
C'est la solidarité dans l'action et la résilience pour la justice climatique.
It is solidarity that is based on African resilience.
Nous venons de sortir d'un forum de parlementaires où nous avons montré que les parlementaires ont un rôle plus important à jouer parce que les négociations sur le climat étaient des négociations de l'exécutif. Il y avait moins d'implication des parlementaires.
We're just coming out from a forum where we've determined that the role of parliamentarians in climate negotiations is more important, more than ever before, because negotiations have so far been issues of the executive.
C'est pour nous maintenant le moment d'agir et d'agir comment, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, c'est le moment d'agir par les contrôles du gouvernement pour qu'il respecte les engagements parce qu'assez souvent on s'engage, on ne respecte pas les engagements.
It is therefore the opportune moment for us to act. And how do we act? By controlling government action and holding them accountable to the engagements that they've taken internationally, that they must see to it that they are applied nationally.
Dans toutes les discussions, vous entendrez que les technologies existent, l'argent est disponible, mais l'argent n'est pas accessible pour le pays le plus affecté d'Afrique.
In all of this, we notice that technology is available, finances are available, but they are not accessible to the countries that are most impacted by climate change.
Notre rôle sera de nous battre aux côtés de nos populations parce que nous représentons ces populations. Vous ne pouvez pas être parlementaire si la population ne vous donne pas ses voix. Nous devons porter les voix de la population.
Our role, therefore, is to continue to fight alongside our population because we represent the population, and you cannot be a parliamentarian without having been given the mandate by the population. Hence, we are supposed to fight alongside our population and in their interests. Thank you.
Thank you. We are down to about 5 minutes. And, you know, this conversation is so important. There is never enough time for us to come together and try to make things right. I want to put a plug that we have a global Afro beat program every night here in Egypt at 8 p.m. The Chisholm Legacy Project is hosting, where we bring everyone from the Afro diaspora together. We make sure we're intentional that we have different voices. So if you want to watch us on live stream for that. And then we want to just kind of pose the question to everyone here seated in this room, and for those around the world watching and listening, what can everyone do to support advancing racial justice in the UNFCCC and beyond? And there's so much that we can do and already are doing, but I want to offer signing this resolution and moving what's forth in this resolution. I want to offer as one step. I want to thank you all for joining and become a participant in the Global Afro-Descendant Climate Justice Collaborative. And I just want to say, what do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? Ashe. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Please feel free to take your seats. Welcome to the Climate Justice Pavilion, and a big thank you to the team who put this together at Impact and the allies and partners involved. So thank you very much for this space. My name is Catherine Robinson. I'm head of campaigns for Natural Justice. And I'm joined today by the Director of Natural Justice, Puven Mudli, and a close comrade and ally and activist from South Africa, Nontle Mbutuma. So a warm welcome to our speakers. So we've invited you here today to have a conversation about climate litigation in South Africa, and having a discussion about the vulnerable communities that are resisting fossil fuels and protecting their right to civic participation. The panel is basically a focus on the recent landmark victory, stopping Shell's proposed offshore oil and gas development. And this documentary tells the stories of all the litigators involved, but more importantly, the Amapondo people who have been struggling to protect their land and their sea and their livelihoods and cultural heritage along South Africa's wild coast. And this struggle has been a century-long struggle against colonialism, and now against neo-colonialism and neoliberalism. So we'd like to share just a short snippet of our film, our documentary film, which has been produced over the last year. And this tells the compelling story of the victorious court case that Natural Justice and others won to save the wild coast. Thank you.
Thixo siyakucela zinyanya zamampondo siyanicela yibani nathi kule mpi sibhekene nayo.
This battle against Shell is not just about Shell, it's a battle for survival. Indigenous communities in different parts of the world are the last line of defense. Because this is the biggest struggle of our lives.
The case against Shell exploring for oil and gas in our ocean is about the rights of these coastal communities. The coastal communities have to give a consent for whatever economic activity or development that is going to interfere with their way of life.
The idea that cultural and spiritual rights that include a responsibility to look after the environment, the idea that that can trump a multi-billion rand search for oil and gas, that is extraordinary.
People lived here for thousands of years, but they had very minimum impact on the environment. The most ancient ancestors who were here in this continent before even the arrival of the Westerners, they are believed to reside in the ocean.
Constitution said, we, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustice of our past. South Africa belongs to all who live in it, and every citizen is equal, protected by the law.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry about the sound issues we had there. I think we can't play too loudly here, but that just gives you a sneak peek into the film. We will be having a full screening of the documentary this Sunday at the Climate Justice Hub, which is hosted by Can International. So there it'll be at 6 p.m. So we invite you to join us there on Sunday to watch the full film. So thank you. I'm just going to hand over to Pooven. It was over a year ago at COP26 that Natural Justice got wind of the fact that Shell would be blasting seismic surveys across the wild coast in search for oil and gas. So I'm just going to ask Pooven, can you take us back to that moment when we first discovered that was going to happen in South Africa?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. So I first got...
Put it right here.
I first got wind of it through a WhatsApp message. Some comrade in South Africa asked me if I knew that Shell was going to do the seismic survey. I had no idea. And so, I then checked in with my team to see what's going on. And once we realized actually they were going to start the seismic blasting on the 1st of December, and we were already in November, we had to step into action quite quickly. Interestingly enough, there were other, activists from the Netherlands that were there that had defeated Shell earlier that year in the Netherlands, to the point where Shell is now has to reduce their emissions, not increase, the extraction and so on. So it was quite a moment when the biggest delegation at the COP in Glasgow was oil and gas representatives. Every leader, spoke the best they could about how amazing the world is, how they're going to make the difference, how, they're going to transition to a clean and make a just transition. But we know all of those were words, because behind the scenes, all of these deals were happening, not just in South Africa. Biden was making deals in the US. I mean, it was happening all over the place. So, the biggest thing then was to know that we're always going to be in this situation where leaders speak with forked tongues, walk a forked road, because they'll say one thing and do something else. And in the case of Shell, our government did whatever it could on behalf of Shell and impact Africa versus communities and communities like the one Nonchile comes from, where, they've been battling Australian mining companies that were wanting to mine the sand dunes in that same beautiful area, etc. So it almost comes in waves, these types of struggles, and it's never ending. And a big point being there in Glasgow was knowing that we're on our own. It's communities that ultimately have to stand up. There's no one else that's going to be there, except in this case we realized actually the courts do listen.
Thanks so much, Pooven. I wanted to just speak to Nontle now about the importance of this case for the Amapondo people, because like I said in the beginning, this has been an ongoing struggle. It's been happening for centuries. Why was this case and others before it? Why were they so critical to you and your community members?
Thank you so much. Yeah, this case, it was the most important. It does not mean that the other cases were not important, because we were fighting so many cases in Pondoland of extractivism, because it's clear right now that the economy is only pushing the extractivism that can uplift the economy. And the reason why this one was so important, when they just said Shell says that they discovered the oil and gas in our ocean. Ocean for us, it's a life. Ocean is our livelihood. Ocean is our sacred place. It's not just a place for leisure. You know, now when you come to distract or destroy the ocean, you destroy us. And mostly the developers, they just think that there's no culture. You know, we were in the headlines of the media that our ancestors blocked trillions of dollars for protecting the ancestors. Practice culture in South Africa is part of the human rights. Now, you cannot violate our human rights because of you are pushing the profit. That is why we were defending and we're standing up to fight that our livelihood, our culture must be protected before the profit. Now, Shell did not even believe that our communities like us, because we taken as we are uneducated because we are in a rural communities. But yes, we are uneducated, but when it comes to nature, when it comes to land, we are the professors. That is why we defend and will never turn back when it comes to defend our livelihood. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nontle. I just want to prove in, you know, what Nontle is saying about indigenous and local communities being the professors of their land, of their lives, of their futures. Can you've just convened folks from all over the world, indigenous wisdom keepers. Can you tell us a little bit more about the importance of us acknowledging that indigenous and local communities are the professors of the land and the sea and the soil?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had probably about 42 people come from across the globe, from various traditions. Some of them are actually here today. And part of the process is actually a decolonization process, because we've been so colonized across the globe. And, you know, in the civil society circles, we talk about decolonization. But what does that actually mean? And just going back to the earlier session, unless we figure this out, not just in our minds, but in our hearts, we'll be stuck in that paradigm, because we feel we have to operate in a certain way on the planet, and that's what's leading us to the brink of destruction. So having these indigenous wisdom keepers, activists, coming together to look at what can we do differently, because if we keep, you know, coming to these COPs, if we keep, you know, doing the same strategies that we are doing, we're obviously seeing that, you know, we're making some gains and some victories, but there's a tsunami that's coming. So in this case, when we defeated Shell, we realized that there were 438 other oil and gas projects that are destined for the next 5 years just in Africa alone. And we know that we can't, you know, afford that. So the indigenous wisdom, you know, has been kept away for a long time because of colonization and the violations. But that knowledge is starting to come to the fore, and people are now truly understanding that, you know, indigenous and local communities are protecting 80% of the biodiversity with the knowledge that they've carried through generations. And some of it is about, you know, how we are so connected, interconnected as humanity with nature. But some of it is also, you know, looking at fundamental principles of how we operate on this planet. You know, instead of competition, instead of violence, we go back to the fundamentals. And, you know, we've been so ingrained through colonization that we don't even feel comfortable, you know, to get to that place within ourselves where, you know, we can be open and loving and do all of those things as opposed to having to be in competition, you know, all the time.
Thanks, Puvan. Nontle, do you have anything to add? Feel free.
Yes, of course. You know, when you want to colonize the communities, you just colonize their minds, because you tell them what they have is not good, it's not important. This is what they are doing right now, that the culture that we have is not important. What is important is oil and gas, because they know that once people, they lost their culture, there will be no more of communities that respect the nature, because while people, they have culture, they know that each and every species around, it's important to their lives. It's connected to their lives. Now, we've just been told that the most important thing is jobs. These jobs are coming with burden. These jobs are coming with the negative impact into our lives. Now, let's think before we say yes, and let's make sure that as people, we have a right to choose and we have a right to say no to every development that is being imposed in our communities. Because this push of development in the name of creating jobs is the way of colonizing our communities, it's the way of colonizing our people and displacing us. And we'll realize later that this jobs thing is not for us, it's for them. At the end of the day, we live as we poor and until we're getting more poor.
Thanks, Nontle. And just for everyone's understanding, in South Africa, we have a really high unemployment rate. We're sitting at about a 45% unemployment rate. And what's regularly sold to the communities and the unemployed people of South Africa is that these extractive projects are going to create jobs. And the reality is that South Africa has got one of the longest histories of extractivism and mining in the world. The migrant labor system and extractivism started a very, very long time ago, and yet the majority of South Africans are sitting without power and they're sitting without jobs. And it's very clear that investing in extractivism and in oil and gas is not going to provide employment for the people of South Africa. It never has and never will, and these companies do not really care about workers and communities. And I just want to take us back to the court case. You spoke about it, Nontle. One of the key arguments in that court case was the state and Shell did not fulfill their obligations of consultation and free, prior, and informed consent. And we won the case on that basis, including not taking into account the environmental and human rights harms caused by Shell seismic blasting. But Puvan, you know, you spoke about the oil and gas projects across the continent, and we are seeing that there's a serious dash for Africa's gas. And it's quite a big issue at the moment, especially with the African Common Position, which is basically selling Africa's resources again to the global north, and all the impacts are externalized upon the people of our continent and our land and our environment. Puvan, can you tell us a little bit more about these projects that have been planned and also some of the litigation that we're involved in across the continent?
Yeah, I just want to start with, with this case in terms of, just from the argument side and then quickly go to some of the other cases. One of the fundamental differences with this case, I think, is, we use the normal legal arguments, no consultation, which there wasn't, no proper environmental impact assessment, which there wasn't, etc. But then we started building the climate change arguments about what this means for the planet and the fact that governments have a commitment. And, there's not many legal precedents around that in Africa. So those are starting to build. But the other key argument we took was that the community's spiritual and cultural connection to the ocean and to the land. And we did a ceremony, at the community ahead of the court case. And it was really powerful in the sense that, we decided to go very strongly with that argument about that connection to the ocean. And that was argued very strongly in the case. And Shell, the lawyers from Shell basically laughed at us. They were like, what ancestors? How can you tell they live in the ocean? How do you know where they start and where they end? You know, they mocked us in court. But the judges took that argument very seriously. They looked at our constitution, they looked at the communities, and they took that argument. And in some ways, that argument became quite central in that case, which taught us, you know, let's be as bold as we can in these times. But with some of the other cases, so the Okavango Delta, it's one of the most biodiverse areas between Namibia and Botswana. You know, one of the oldest people on the planet, the San people, you know, are communities that live in these areas. And again, we found out that a Canadian company, Recon Africa, was doing or given permission to do oil and gas exploitation in that whole delta across the two countries. And this was devastating news for nature, for the communities. And it's been quite a challenge to, you know, to organize, to stand up. But, you know, communities, organizations are slowly coming to grips with what's happening and are standing up. The other massive one is the East Africa oil pipeline. It would be the longest heated oil pipeline on the planet that starts in Uganda and ends in Tanzania. It cuts across indigenous lands across both countries and will have a devastating impact because of the migration of animals in that area and, you know, given oil spills, the water usage, etc., would have a massive impact. And again, you know, we're going to court there with a range of other organizations and communities are standing up. But ultimately, you know, it's a question of, with 400 projects, you know, the question to us collectively is, what more should we do, or how should we do this differently? Because it's important to win these individual battles, but unless we come together collectively, you know, as humanity, it's just going to be too big. So, you know, it's something would be good to engage with people here today.
Thanks, Puvan. And just talking about some of the strategies for resistance, with this particular case, we saw resistance in and through the courtroom and through the legal system. But it was coupled with serious protesting and advocacy by the entire country, and it saw a lot of solidarity across the globe. So, Nontle, if I may, can you tell us about the importance of that grassroots mobilizing of communities on the ground to continue to resist? Because I think one of the judges in the case said that this case felt palpable. So people were on the streets almost every day in the lead up to the case, registering their resistance. So can you tell us a little bit more about that, Nontle, and how important it is for us to continue with our resistance?
It's very important to continue with our resistance, because the fight that we are fighting is not just about us, it's about the Mother Earth, which is something that all for us, in order to live, we're dependent on it. Now, to do so, we need to mobilize our communities. We need to concertize our communities. If our communities are standing together, if we do solidarity, there's nothing can stand in front of us. That is the most important thing, because I've just seen an experience on this case of against Shell, where we mobilize all the coastal communities, because mostly these big national corporations, when they come to our communities, they're always targeting the monarchies, like in our case, where they just said that we consulted the monarchies. But the judicial court system, it tells them clear that monarchies or the chief are not the communities. If you consulted the monarchies, you are not consulting the communities. Communities are directly affected by the impact of your oil and gas. Now, that is why we need to educate and concertize our communities, because when they've been informed, it means that they can stand for themselves and they can argue, and there's nothing can disturb them. And also, mostly, these cases, mostly us as communities, we believe of fighting on the ground, but we need to use both, fighting on the ground and fighting in the court of law. And this is how it helps us to defeat these transnational corporations to come and distract our minerals in our ocean. Mostly people, they say that, no, we need oil and gas. Honestly, do we really need? I think we have enough minerals on top of the oil. I mean, on top of the earth. We have so much plastics that are going to the rivers, are going to our ocean. When is the time to do the recycling? And when is the time to recycle the minerals that are on top? Why we just continue to distract and to continue to mine? It means that we push ourselves until the edge of the cliff. And we have already experiencing so much global warming impact in our lives. We're experiencing floods, we're experiencing extremely hot, and especially for us that we are dependent on agriculture for survival. You know, we affected strongly. Now it's highly time for all of us to stand up and work together to fight the natural justice. Because mostly, you know, I've also seen that if we are fighting for nature, our judicial system does not understand the language. It means that all the time when we fight for the natural justice, we need to attach with the human rights. Now, I think that time it needs to be end because natural justice needs to stand itself and to be protected. Thank you.
Just to add to that, I think, you know, the difference with this protest was people came from all walks of life. You know, so it was the coastal communities, it was small-scale fisher folk along those communities, it was surfers who enjoy the ocean. It was just people that love the ocean and being at the ocean. You know, to the point where, you know, some of my family members have never been in a protest. And then they would call me and say, I'm going to this protest to protest against Shell. Or, you know, I was in a bookshop and two old people were chatting. And I was just overhearing what they were saying. And they were like, we have to stop Shell. You know, there's a protest tomorrow. We should definitely go for it. You know, so it was incredible how people came knowing that, you know, we have to protect, you know, what we have left.
Thank you both so much. Just in wrapping up, because we would actually like to have a conversation with folks here to share solidarity and to share struggles and solutions. But I just to wrap up, you know, we know the climate crisis is not going to be solved at this COP. We know we're not going to achieve climate justice here in Sharm el-Sheikh. But just to take us back, what are some of the strategies of resistance that we need to harness and mobilize, not just in our own countries, but across borders? What are some of the kind of calls to action that you have for people sitting here, and for folks watching, and of course the governments negotiating this COP? What are your calls to action, and what are some of the strategies of resistance we need to enact?
Yeah, I guess a few things. One is, you know, as I said earlier, I think ultimately it's communities that are going to protect what we have. And so the key thing is, how do we stand behind these communities? And for any struggle, you know, I think standing behind the solidarity elements is ultimately what's going to, you know, protect what we have. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, you know, we need to use whatever we have available. And so in this case, you know, like the Shell judgment, you know, I think the courts are going to play a key role going forward. It doesn't mean it's going to solve everything, but at least it's one line, you know, that we can use. And there's a growing body of litigation going on, both in terms of the rights of Mother Nature, but also human rights, and more the intersection between the two, because you can't have one without the other. It's all interconnected. So I think, you know, that's another kind of channel and avenue. I think holding people accountable, holding companies accountable, holding governments to account in whatever shape or form, you know, whether that is through protest, through resistance, and not allowing them to do things. Because ultimately, you know, what we're dealing with here with the sixth mass extinction is we're dealing with issues of right to life, whether we will live and whether we'll survive. We're dealing with issues around right to dignity. right to a clean, healthy, safe environment, which has just become a human right as well. So we deal right to water, right to health, etc. All these fundamental rights are being violated. And the people that are responsible for violating those rights should be held criminally liable because they are criminals. And I think unless we shift that paradigm to see that the people that are, saying the fancy things, the people that are in power, the reality is they are criminals. And I think it's important for us to make that shift so that we can actually hold them accountable, or else we'll continue to chase them, the shiny things they say, and no difference is made.
Yeah, as I was saying earlier, that let's mobilize our communities. At the moment, my hope, I don't know your hope, but my hope is to mobilize communities. If communities are standing up, there's nothing can push. But if the communities, they are not aware, they don't understand, honestly, we are facing with a high up mountain. And also to push the environmental laws in our government, because we cannot have the environmental laws that are weakened, but the extractivism laws are more stronger. It means that our fight is going to be always difficult to fight in court. And also to make sure that these binding treaties, which is free, prior, informed consent, our countries that they sign for, are implemented. Not just they ignore when the investors, they are coming. For example, in South Africa, the free, prior, informed consent, South African government is part of it. But when the investors, they come, they just completely forget that they are part of that. And now to be reminded is communities that they stand up and tell them that, no, don't forget what you're signing for. And it needs to be implemented. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. We'd like to just open the floor for a few minutes, and we really welcome anyone sitting here to share their struggles in their countries, and because ultimately the building solidarity across borders is across these struggles and across movements is what is going to help us achieve climate justice. So we know that this space is hosted by folks who are supporting communities in the United States and in the global north who are facing the same struggles. So, we really welcome you to share those and to share your strategies for resistance. Just to get us started, I'd like to hand over to Jacob. And Jacob has been involved in the Dakota pipeline, the resistance against the Dakota pipeline. So, Jacob, please feel free. The cameras are there, so...
Okay.
Yeah,
hello, everyone.
Cool.
Jacob Johns. My name is Jacob Johns. I'm from the Okameoratham Nations and Hopi Nations in America. In the U.S., we have the similar situation with the marriage of corporations and government perpetuating genocide, perpetuating cultural genocide, and more importantly, perpetuating the destruction of our planet. When we talk about mobilizing communities, you could see the biggest mobilization America has ever seen was against the Dakota Access Pipeline, where governments and corporations were in bed to poison the water of the Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota nations. And the entire country mobilized and inspired the world. And we lost. We lost. There's oil running through the Dakota Access Pipeline right now. It's already leaked twice, and it's poisoned the water. We understand that these things continue to happen, and the marriage between corporations and government continue to perpetuate these problems that we see globally. And once again, the only thing that we have are each other. The only thing that holds us strong and the only thing that continues to unify us is the basic decency of protecting the planet for future generations. We talk about water being life, and we talk about what that is. But we are water, and we are each other. And more importantly, that all we have is each other. We stand together in solidarity across borders, across things, because our hearts beat with the same energy. And for those people in power who don't listen to the voices of reason and don't listen to the voices of logic, it's important for you to quiet your mind. Listen to your heartbeat, because that energy is beating yours as well as mine. And it's important for us to understand that this victory that has been instituted by the natural justice folks and the team there is an inspiration internationally, and it has huge implications for the rights of nature, and more importantly, it gives a just cause for people internationally to use this as we move forward together strategically to try to save the planet for future generations. It's really amazing.
Thank you so much, Jacob. I just want to hand over to a comrade and sister from Zimbabwe to share some of the same struggles and perspectives.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really feel honored to be part of the collective, particularly part of the natural justice family. And what I want to share is a tool that we once used in Zimbabwe for us to claim back our land and our identity. That is called the Biocultural Community Protocol. Because one of the violences that we face as indigenous people or as black African people is the violence on our knowledge systems, violence on our cultures, violence on our beliefs. And through use of that tool, we managed to preserve our identity by writing down, because part of this dominant ideology is the erasure of our identities, the erasure of our stories. And I can hear from the comrade from the Dakota, I had been following that, the Dakota pipeline, that there is a systematic way where they will erase you, that whole story of the struggle, because we are not only fighting for our lands and territories, but we are also fighting to be treated with the same human dignity that respects our lands, that respects our bodies as African women, because we believe that whatever happens to the land, to our rivers, to our environment, it also affects us as African women in particular, and the indigenous people, because this land is carrying our stories, our histories, even our health systems, and our spiritual well-being is contained in this land. So for me, I'm saying, through the Biocultural Community Protocol, we managed to document. We managed to document our claims over the land. We managed to document our cultures. We managed to document even our sacred places. We even managed to fight for the protection of our baobab tree in Zimbabwe. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much,
Willa. Thank you so much. I just want to say that we're so proud about the winning of this case and the kind of discussion that is happening here today. Now, I want to give a reflection and a forward thinking about what has just happened here in this conversation. That when I had a meeting and discussion in Kigali about some of these issues that are happening in our society, and the young people are telling me that one of the challenges they actually have is that they cannot, they cannot come forward and supporting the mobilization processes that you are talking about, because they fear that governments will come for them. They have seen governments coming for them, and so they fear to come forward. And this kind of story that we now have perhaps is the inspiration that we now need to document and share forward, and that between now and the next COP, we are going to have more cases that NJ and team and all of us will have won, so that this kind of message can go forward to the multinational companies and governments that we are not going to just, deplete our land and our resources and extract and use fossil fuels the way we want and so on and so forth. And so it's important that we document this and deliberately have the so what plan going forward and just ensure that we mobilize more and we become more organized, because as you won, they went to re-strategize. So we re-strategize more and ensure that we have more cases we are winning in the coming days. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Benson. Would anyone like to pose a question to the panel or a contribution? Please feel free. Would you like to come up?
Hello, my name is Sememokun. I'm from Nigeria. I work with Kebet-Kase Women Development and Resource Center. I just want to briefly share the story of women from the Niger Delta region of Nigeria. The Niger Delta region over the past 6 decades have been suffering from oil and gas extraction activities being carried out by Shell, Chevron, and other multinational corporations. And because of all these extraction activities, the entire environment in the Niger Delta is devastated. Right now, we do not have access to clean water because oil is being spilled into the rivers, the creeks, and the streams as a result of the extraction activities. All of us, we are breathing polluted air because through the drilling processes, gas is being released, toxic gases is being released into the atmosphere. So we breathe polluted air. All of us in the Niger Delta, we are being vulnerable to all kinds of strange diseases. Women are being impacted in a peculiar way. It's affecting fertility issues, it's affecting our skin, it's affecting the babies. And you know women have that responsibilities of taking care of the family, of even managing household water. And because of these challenges in the environment, livelihoods are being affected because farming, fishing, occupations of the women is being impacted negatively, and there are no alternative means of livelihood. Right now, as we are here at the COP, many communities in the Niger Delta is being affected by flooding. Communities are being submerged. People are living on the road where they have a little upland, and women are impacted with their many children. Some women in riverine communities are trapped, and they have been staying inside canoes for the past 3 weeks to 1 month. The Niger Delta is directly affected by the climate crisis. As we are here, I share with the panelists the story with the Amadiba Crisis Committee, and I want to really learn from their strategies. What we are doing in Kebet-Kase is mobilizing community women to speak up about these issues, because tradition does not really give women the opportunity to speak and the opportunity to engage in discussions with the corporations. As she said, shared in her story, the negotiations are being done by the chiefs and the kings, and women don't have a place in such spaces. So what we do is creating a platform for community women to speak out. For the past 6 years, we have been holding the Niger Delta Women's Day of Action for Environmental Justice every December 17. This year, we are going to hold that forum again, and I'm also going to take lessons learned from the COP27 from all these powerful community activists that are sharing experiences. I'm going to take the lessons back home to further strengthen the women's movement. I am also learning from the litigation cases, because we need to balance community activism with taking the corporations to court. The legal processes are usually very long, and this discourages community activists, particularly the women. So there is need for support, for solidarity with other communities, with other civil society organizations, to support the women not to be discouraged, but to keep speaking up against capitalism and the multinational corporations that are destroying the environment in the Niger Delta. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate, and feminist power to you, comrade. Would anyone else like to share?
I think it's important to understand that connecting the dots from one community to another community across the globe. The stories that you heard in terms of how the fossil fuel industry has erased culture. It's erased entire towns. It's not just in Africa, but in Louisiana. I'll give you 4 examples of how the oil and gas industry has basically wiped out, made invisible, Reveltown, Sunrise, Mossville, Norco, many of these, Louisiana, many of these communities were founded right after slavery. They survived slavery, they survived Reconstruction, they survived the Jim Crow segregation, apartheid, American style, but they could not survive the petrochemical industry. So what we have right now is a challenge of how we can come out of this COP stronger, much more unified across the globe in terms of a strategy. So I would call for some type of follow-up post-COP to get the names, addresses, emails, phone numbers, whatever we need to do to be in contact, in solidarity once we get back home, because there is a powerful network in terms of building out. And there's so much you can do alone, but we can do much more as a global collective on this issue. So I would say the contact would be to who? Bridget. Okay. I just had to say that because it sounded so familiar. Working on this stuff 40 years and seeing communities that were there 40 years ago are not there now.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
So, hi everyone. My name is Radiatu and I come from Liberia. I'm like, the stories are the same. We have the same stories. So what we need is to come together, right? She talked about mobilizing the communities. Like, I can tell you that in Liberia, we have a case. We mobilize our communities over a period of 15 years. And we have finally gone to court. And we sued the government and we sued the company. And the suing for the government is just to give the identity of these communities. The first thing is that in Liberia, our governments have not recognized the fact that we have indigenous people, that these people own the land, they have used the land. So we have this case ongoing, and I can tell you that's one of the strategies. We have stirred up the entire government. I mean, like, there are a series of discussions ongoing. Whatever you pass in the corner of a meeting, oh no, Green Advocates has just sued the government. I was even attacked in Ghana at the first Business and Human Rights Forum because I met this guy, and I was like, I introduced myself to him and told him that I work for Green Advocates, and he said, oh no, Green Advocates, you are the one who have just filed a complaint. And like, honestly, I forgot that I was a human rights defender, and I told him yes. But like, I was right to say it because like, our communities are fed up. They are tired. They are just tired of everything that is happening to them. So like, we are ready, and the only way forward is for us to mobilize these communities. Like, we mobilize this community over a long period of time. And I can tell you that there is no need to give up, because in the process of mobilizing, the companies are going to come. Like, they have their own strategies. They divide and they rule. So we had something happening like that. But the key message is that these communities were ready to stand up, and they stood up until they got to court. As we speak now, there are issues of defenders. For example, a colleague that is working with a company, like they printed out all of a copy of the cases, and they are taking it to each one of the community members that work for the company. Oh, you say you work for the company, and you file a complaint against the company? That in itself is a human rights issue. I should be free to speak. I should be able to give my complaints so that I can tell you listening to your story is very important, and I can assure you that I'm sure we are going to come up very victorious, because this is something that we need across Africa. And the collective is what we need. As long as we can mobilize these communities and stand up strong and come up strong, the power is in us as people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In South Africa, we say amandla wetu, which is power to the people. So you can repeat it after me. Amandla. Amandla. Cool.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ruth Santiago. I'm from Puerto Rico. I work with community and environmental groups in especially Afro Descendant areas that are more heavily populated. And just as the groups who have spoken and the people who have spoken here today, we also use litigation as a tool, right? In addition to community organizing and other tools. And what we have found in terms of the litigation, of course, is it can be very impactful at times, and after many years, we sometimes get victories against especially fossil fuel projects and centralized energy generation projects. But that lately, especially, we're finding that the courts are saying, oh, you don't have capacity, you don't have legal standing, what we call in Puerto Rico legitimación activa. And so even before we get to the merits of a case, they're closing out the possibility of having the case before the courts. So, I mean, it's important to do, and sometimes we do push through that barrier. But I think, as others have said here, the mobilization, right, the community organizations, and what Dr. Bullard said, right, let's follow up after this. And so just, I wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. We have one final intervention, and then we'll wrap this up. Thank you, everyone.
Well, what I wanted to say is that I think I'm having the experience at this meeting, the same experience that a young Nigerian student had when he visited Cantor Alley in Louisiana, where I live. And as we were driving through the community, seeing Shell, Exxon, you name them, all of these facilities, fence line to African American communities, and white communities had been moved away, and we were left there. He said, this looks just like my country. And I said, the point is, they're doing the same thing to the same people, just on a different continent. When you think about how we are connected, believe me when I tell you, it is the same story in the U.S. for people of color in general. So if you're in the southern United States, where more African Americans live, it's mostly us. If you go towards California, then it's mostly Mexicans or Latinos. If you go to Montana or someplace like that, Oklahoma, it's Native Americans. So they find us wherever we are, people of color, and they do the same thing to us over and over again. American courts are probably ahead of South African courts in figuring out a way to continue to deny us our rights. But I can tell you this, what's happening in America in the courts will be following you very soon, because the Exxon, Mobil, all of these companies, international companies, they work together and they learn the tactics, and every time they get a new tactic, we have to figure out how to morph and come up with a new system. And I say this all the time, community people have to do the work of the government. The government is supposed to protect its people, but it does not. So communities have to get smart. They have to learn science. They have to learn politics. They have to learn other languages. All of this we have to do to protect ourselves. What we are looking for is a systems change where we move to a different model, not just in the U.S., and we're fighting for our lives right now, today to be, because we're voting today. And how this election goes will determine the next decade for us in America, and we're hoping that we win. But if we don't, we will still continue to fight. So we have to come together. This is the last thing. I know I talked too long. But the first time I went to South Africa, we went to a village that was being poisoned by mercury. Guess where that mercury came from? Louisiana. It came from Borden Chemicals in Louisiana. So there was a straight line between the pollution of our brothers and sisters on the continent to African Americans living in Louisiana. It's the same multinational corporations doing the same thing to people who don't have power. So we have to unite. That's the only way this is going to happen. Thank you.
So, just in 1 minute in closing, what I want to say is, yesterday the UN General Secretary said, we're basically on the highway to hell. And instead of putting our foot on the brake, we're putting the foot on the accelerator. Now, it's a clear indication that we have to do this differently. And we know in the next few years, things are going to collapse. Economic systems will collapse. Ecosystems will collapse. All that is already happening and will happen even faster. I think the key thing for us is to step out of that, the rat race we're in. There's a very good friend of mine from Nigeria who says, times are urgent, let's slow down. Because we can't just think we know what the answers are and run in a certain direction. I think going inside ourselves, slowing down a bit, and then figuring out what we want to do and bringing forth that indigenous knowledge to create something very different as these parts of society are collapsing. It's important that those alternatives start to emerge now.
My final word is that if we working together as a collective to make sure that these cases are being supported and we push, because these cases are not just only for those communities that they won, but it sets a precedent to also to other communities to use as a references when they go to court. And it helps us a lot that these transnational corporations, when they come to our communities or our countries, when they feel that there's too much pressure, they just go to the neighboring community. Now, it's time for these to tell them that human rights are universal. It's not that when you didn't get a chance to destroy the human rights on this neighboring community, but there's no human rights on another community. Human rights are universal, and let's work as collectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us and for staying with us today and for showing your solidarity and sharing your struggles. And a special thank you to We Act and Deep South Center for Environmental Justice and Bullard Center for hosting us. Sorry about that. We really appreciate this space. It's really an important space to build solidarity across borders and movements. So many thanks, and power and solidarity to everyone over the next 2 weeks. Thanks.